You've got a lot of founder-led companies typically, and what happens is they almost always think the customer is like them because they started a product to scratch an itch that they personally had. It's like, I don't like the dresses I can buy. I don't like the beauty products I can buy. I don't like the food I can buy. I want this. And so they start the company. That's great. But what they do is they assume all the customers are like them, which is, without exception, so far in my experience, not true. The customers usually have very different motivations. So try and understand why people are in your space. If you're selling furniture, are they bored? Are they moving house? Did they just get married? Are they stuck at home in lockdown? What's their motivations? And what's the trigger that makes them enter the space?
Hi everyone, welcome to Shaking Things Up. I'm Stephen Duke, Head of Marketing at Wayflyer. And in this show, we go deep inside the minds of some of the top experts in e-commerce to understand some of the new, exciting ways they're tackling big problems in e-commerce. Today on the show, we had Mark Bartz. Mark was introduced to me as the godfather of e-commerce marketing. He has experience working with some of the top retailers in the world, and he's got a really nice balanced view between the kind of algorithmic and performance side of digital marketing and some of the more traditional elements around kind of brand and messaging and understanding your customer. So this was a great conversation. He gave us some really great practical tips on if you're an e-commerce brand or if you're running marketing for an e-commerce brand, what should you be focused on, and also what sort of stuff can you actually maybe even do today or tomorrow to start to improve the performance of your marketing and building your brand over time. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. It was a good one. Mark, can you give us a quick intro as to who you are and some of the stuff that you do?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I guess Godfather's probably true in summer. I've been doing online before. Some of the people I work with were born. Started building websites in the mid-90s and built the, if those people old enough to remember, the MSN network of websites. I was lead dev for that in the late 90s, during the dot-com boom. And then I've done a whole bunch of other stuff since then and ran an agency didn't run an agency, I was head of consulting for an agency that did marketing for a lot of the big brands in Australia, Officeworks and Dimix and Catch and Allianz and people like that. And then I was CMO of a fashion brand called Shopo for a couple of years, and we did quite well there and had some nice successes. And for the last 3 years, in fact, it's my 3-year anniversary next week. The last 3 years, I've been working just as an independent advisor, working primarily with digitally led companies, helping them with growth and planning and strategy and all that sort of stuff.
Awesome. For anybody who doesn't know Shopo, especially some of the people who might be joining outside of Australia, Shopo has been a massive success in the Australian e-commerce market, Mark, right?
Yeah. When I was there, when I joined, we were doing about just over a shade of 20 million. And when I left, we were doing about 85 mil, and we had no funding in that period either. That was all just from cash.
Awesome. Very cool. So today I'm excited to jump in and have a chat really about what's going on in marketing for e-commerce brands at the minute. It's a pretty fast changing environment, lots of different things changing. And it's hard to know what the priorities are, where to be focusing on. So, we're in this kind of post iOS 14, post cookies world. If you're a CMO or, CEO of an e-commerce brand, what are your priorities right now? What are the top 3 things that you're thinking about and looking to deliver on?
Top 3 things. That's a big question. I mean, you've referenced the kind of post-cookie world, and a lot of people keep talking about I'm going to go on the death of cookies tangent here, which I think you kind of opened the door to. A lot of people talk about the death of cookies, and they keep talking about, when Google, and they've just moved the deadline again to 2024 or whatever, and people are thinking, oh, we've got a reprieve. But I don't actually realize it's kind of already kind of here in a lot of ways. Yes, Google is going to, that is the single biggest event, but it's a whole series of events. The other single biggest event was obviously Apple turning off, data access to especially Facebook, and Facebook losing data signals. And reducing the effectiveness of their algorithms. But, so people are putting too much focus on the Chrome thing. And I'm hearing probably once a week, someone says to me, look, our Facebook ads are just less effective than they used to be. And that's going to keep going. And what's happened, and this is going to one of the top priorities, I guess, is people have essentially become quite lazy in a lot of ways, and they've outsourced their marketing to an algorithm. And they basically just say to Facebook and to a lesser extent to Google and some of the programmatic platforms, and they've said, find me customers who are ready to buy. And that's Facebook's magic. That's Facebook's gold. They have, what's called conversion campaigns, and they are very, very, very good at finding people who are ready to buy. And so so people have forgotten, let's forget about all the marketing fundamentals. Let's forget about value proposition. Let's forget about positioning. Let's forget about customer insights. Let's forget about all that old school stuff, which is still so valuable today. And let's just write blank checks to Facebook and let them find customers who are ready to buy. And if you have a good enough, high enough quality audience, which Facebook has historically delivered, and you just shove a product in their face, people will buy. But you're stuck in that. And so what's happening is we've got this kind of generation of digitally led marketers who have kind of grown up, they're perhaps in their late 20s or whatever, and they've grown up, and that's all they know as marketing, is writing checks to Google, writing checks to Facebook, and finding people who are ready to buy. And they've not had to do any work. They've not had to do any customer insights. They've not had to build brands. They've not to do any of that sort of stuff. And I worked with a company, I think it was last year, who that was basically 90% of their revenue was just Facebook conversion ads. That was it. That was their marketing. And I see a lot of companies who are doing that to a lesser extent. And so it's just a massive, massive business risk. It's literally an existential threat that if you've outsourced your entire marketing function to a Facebook algorithm, that Facebook algorithm is under attack from multiple angles. It's not much of a business, and frankly, I don't know what you're doing for a job at that point, because it's not that hard to run Facebook conversion ads. So that's one big change. So it's basically shifting away. How do we get less dependency on algorithms, and how do we understand the full end-to-end contribution of marketing? How do we understand how marketing is measured? How do we look beyond just simple attribution measures? And I think that's the biggest challenge for digitally led marketers. Obviously, marketing is a lot bigger than digital.
It's super interesting. It is. It's a little scary when you put it like that we've just outsourced our marketing to a Facebook algorithm, and that algorithm is now under attack. And as you said, it's been under attack for quite a while, right? It's not something that's coming in the future. It's already here. It's already been happening, and people have seen the effect in their marketing performance. So when I hear this, if I'm a CMO or a founder, I think this sounds like a big job to do. You talk about positioning, you talk about building a brand, you talk about messaging, value proposition, user research. Where do you start? Is this the new world we're living in, where we're going to have to, marketing is just going to become a bigger and harder thing for digitally led e-commerce brands?
I think it was easier for a period. We got this 10-year window where, it was relatively easy, but, we're also seeing that, due to the effects of COVID, that, all the, traditional businesses, your department stores and, offline companies who are, forced to go online very, very rapidly or die, and some of them died and some of them went online. And so we're seeing more people competing in the auctions on Google and Facebook and the other networks, the programmatic networks. And so even privacy aside, even difficulties aside, the CPMs are going up, the cost per clicks are going up. And so if you're just dependent on these signals, then it becomes very, very high risk again. And, you look at, I'm picking on Facebook just because it's the easiest one to pick on. A Facebook conversion campaign, you might be paying maybe $20 CPM on that. Very, very rough ballpark, depends on your industry and depends on a whole bunch of other things. Whereas you can do brand campaigns for maybe $3 CPM. So you can reach whatever it's 7-8 times as many people for the same price. Now, they're not necessarily people who are ready to buy today, but they're people who are going to buy at some point. So I can't remember the question. I'm going off on a tangent here, Stephen. Yeah, no,
I guess I'm interested to know, I guess kind of coming back to my first question, right, is it seems a little bit doom and gloom so far, right? But what are what are kind of the action? If you're chatting to me and I'm a CMO of a brand or I'm running marketing, what are you telling me that, hey, look, these are the top 3 things that you really need to be focused on so that you can grow your brand?
So number 1 is understand who your customers are and what their motivations are. Why are they in your space and why are they buying? And generally, I find when you do that, I do a lot of customer insights research, and there's very cheap ways you can do that, and there's very expensive ways you can do it, and they both have their pros and cons. And I use both. I do use the expensive way sometimes, where you go and do like big customer insights pieces, and I just spent like $45,000 for one company, and which is not big in the grand scheme of things, but it's still a real investment. And understand what people's motivations are, and what are the triggers that are making them enter that space? And what happens, particularly in the e-com world, you've got a lot of founder-led companies typically. And what happens is they almost always think the customer is like them, because they started the product to fill a certain itch they had, to scratch an itch that they personally had. It's like, I don't like the dresses I can buy. I don't like the beauty products I can buy. I don't like the food I can buy. I want this. And so they start the company. That's great. But what they do is they assume all the customers are like them, which is, without exception, so far in my experience, not true. The customers usually have very different motivations. So try and understand why people are in your space. If you're selling furniture, are they bored? Are they moving house? Did they just get married? Are they stuck at home in lockdown? Are they, what's their motivations? And what's the trigger that makes them enter the space? And then you can use that directly to tailor your messaging, to tailor your audiences, to know how to reach people. So that's one part of it. The other one is another one is looking how you measure the effectiveness of your marketing, where people are just using these very simplistic tools, like Google Analytics or the built-in Google Ads tracking or built-in Facebook tracking, which are fine to an extent, but it doesn't reflect reality. The question I like to ask, and works better in person, but I can. You're wearing a green shirt there, Stephen, and can you tell me exactly what ad it was that led you to buy that shirt? Or you look at someone who's, the textbook example is you say, last time you bought a can of Coke, what ad drove you to that can of Coke? And it's such an utterly ridiculous question to ask, right? Of course, there was no one ad that drove you to a can of Coke. Yet, as digital marketers, that's exactly how we think. We think there is one exact ad, exact person at the exact right time that drives you to buy the product. But you look at your own experience and look at how you approach, the many purchases we all make every single day. And it's very rarely that simple. And I see there's this big disconnect between how we approach marketing, how we think about how our customers buy versus how we buy. And it's just this basic, people just have weird concepts, like the customers they do. They're some weird alien species, and it's nothing like me, and I'm pretty sure it's nothing like you, Stephen. And so, yeah, of course, there's a percentage who click and purchase. So looking at looking at more holistic measurements, looking at understanding your customers, and the third one would be looking at the customer experience. And when you talk to people, everyone says, oh, yes, we're customer centric, we're customer focused. Everyone says that. That's complete rubbish. They're not. Unless you've actually literally spoken to customers, unless you've seen them use your online experience. And I'm not just talking about Google Analytics. I'm talking about, literally watching someone use your experience. And almost without exception, when I've done that, watch someone literally using your website, it's always been, oh my goodness, they're doing that. They think that is there. They completely missed that message. Like I was doing this for a company recently, and one of their key, they sell furniture, and one of their key messages is free delivery. And that's relatively unusual in that space, right? Compared to some of their competitors, I could tell it's relatively unusual. And even though there was this great big free delivery banner on the product page, we found that most people, when you actually watch them use it, didn't notice it. And so what we do is we just simply moved that free delivery banner from where it was kind of overlaid on the product image. And then we moved it like under the add to cart button, and sales went up 9%. And it's just simply by observing people and just having some basic empathy and basic kind of, a lot of it is about empathy and just understanding how users approach a space. And we've reduced users to numbers on a spreadsheet, as opposed to, realizing that they're actually real humans with real needs and real drives and real motivations and real challenges and real complex, nuanced paths that can't be captured easily, and acknowledging that.
I really love this. I think it's always extremely humbling whenever you watch a user actually interact with your product.
Oh, I think it's horrific.
Yeah, it really. I think one of my favorite ones is, when you've got like screen recordings, even of people on like your landing pages from your ads, right? Because when you design your landing page and design your ad, you kind of have this vision that people click, and they're going to spend a good 2 minutes like reading all of the copy that you slaved over for so long. And the reality is they get there, they spend like a second, two, quick scroll. Oh no, they're gone. That's it. Maybe they spent 4 seconds on the page. And like, it's super humbling to do that. But I love that framework. I think we've got three things there, right? We've got, firstly, you really need to understand your customers and why they're buying. The second one is all around getting better measurement of your marketing and what's actually driving the performance. And then the third thing is around like understanding and improving customer experience. And I'd love to unpack kind of each of those three. On the first one, you talk about, understanding your customers and why they buy. And you talk about, you've got cheap ways to do it. You've got some expensive ways to do it. Let's maybe talk about each of those. What are kind of the tangible options? If I want to go out today and I want to say, I need to know why my customers are buying from me, what can I do to actually figure that out?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'll talk about a cheap way. One I did a few months ago, and it was a fashion company. And so, and this is actually quite a good technique. It applies, don't know if it applies to every single company, but it applies to a lot of companies. Just used Hotjar, which I'm assuming most listeners are probably familiar with. And I just put a little pop-up, and the question was, I'm trying to remember the exact wording, but it was something like 5-second survey. So, and I deliberately wrote 5-second survey because they knew they weren't going to get baited in. They knew they weren't going to answer a long thing, and have to have another 20 questions after that. Said 5-second survey. What are you looking for on the site today? Or what brings you to the site? I think it was what brings you to the site today, I think was the question. And on this fashion company, people gave their answers, and, and it was, and again, it was verbatim answers. It wasn't a checkbox, because a checkbox assumes you know the answer. And there's a time and a place for having pre-canned answers, but this wasn't the time and place. And we had like a couple hundred answers within like 24 hours or something. People were very willing to give those answers. And so I went through and just chucked them into a spreadsheet and went through and just read them and just manually classified them. And it turned out there were very, very clear patterns why people were buying. And in the case of this company, that's enabled them to pivot their entire marketing approach, because we now actually understand that, the companies they're like 7 or 8 years old companies. They're not new, and they've never actually understood in 7 or 8 years why people are buying their product. And now we have, and there was a really clear, strong pattern. And now we can get that pattern and we can echo that back to the customers through the creative, through the messaging, through the visual merchandising, through the patterns on a website, and actually speak their language back to them, and to communicate that language and associate, this brand is associated with this particular buying habit. And so that feeds into broader brand messaging. I really
like this.
Yeah, it took me,
I really like this.
10 minutes to set up the survey, and I probably spent, an hour doing the analysis. That was it.
Yeah. And there's something great, I think, about these, these free text answers when you can get them, right? Because they're a lot more real than the canned responses. And some people might balk at the idea of like, oh, I got to read a few hundred things, but like, this is where the actual insight is.
That's the best part, not the worst part. Seeing the real human answers. And there's a lot of trash answers. A lot of people saying, "Oh, I want to get a discount," or "I want to know where my order is," and that sort of stuff. You just ignore that stuff.
Yeah. There's also, what I also love about it is, it's a great way to figure out the words that your customers use. So if ever you're copywriting, it's one of my favorite things is to actually say, well, how does the user describe what they've came here for, what they're looking for, what they like about it? Because they'll give you the best words that you can ever use in your copywriting, then you can come up with yourself.
Nice. I like that. Yeah. And let's before we move on, let's not forget about what marketing is. People have forgotten what it is. It's about aligning the company and the market. It's in the name, marketing. So that's what I'm talking about doing. I'm talking about, let's understand what the market is looking for, and let's make sure we align the company with the market.
I think that's a great positioning for marketing. So we talked a little bit about, or you referenced kind of some of the more sophisticated ways. So if you're a bit bigger brand and you want to actually go a bit deeper on it, what are some of your options there? Are you using specific tools? Or are you engaging with market research agencies? What are you doing to get those insights?
Market research agencies, and go inside and go in depth with them. And a common technique I'm a big fan of is called the in-depth interview. And you can do these yourself, and if you have the time, they're not that hard to do. There's a bit of skill to it. I'm not diminishing the importance of a skilled researcher, but it's talking to the customers and really getting deep into their motivations and understanding what they do and how they approach the space. And you can with the one I did, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, with a skilled researcher, we did a questionnaire to it was like 5,000 it was actually, that wasn't customers. A lot of people interview their customers, and what happens is you just get stuck in an echo chamber because you're probably serving a certain portion of the market well. What we wanted to do is we wanted to find out what the entire market was looking for. Let's not look at the customers we're already servicing well. Let's look at the customers we're not servicing well. And how can we align them? And it depends on your research goals, and that there is a time and a place to talk to your customers, absolutely. But in this case, we specifically said, let's talk to non-customers, or let's talk to the whole market, and the majority of the market is non-customers. I think we had 5% of customers in there. And then doing these in-depth interviews and really understanding what their motivations are and what their insights are. And that's how you really get the in-depth, how they're approaching the problem space, what is the real-world challenges we are solving in this. I did another one last year. It's actually for the same fashion company. They're a retained client of mine. And we end up doing a whole pile of research, but one part of it, and the part that really blew me away the most, and we had professional researchers helping us with this, is we had these women going through with their smartphones, and they went through and gave us a guided tour of their wardrobe. And that these videos were about, 20 minutes each, give or take. And they were pulling out these pieces and say, look, this is one of my favorite dresses. I bought this 3 months ago, and I bought it for this party, and I wore it for this. And then, this is what I wear every day to uni, and blah, blah, blah. And they gave us a guided tour of a wardrobe. And we had, there was just 20 women or something giving us these 20-minute videos each, which I would like to say I'm customer focused enough to have spent 20 by 20 minutes, but I didn't watch all of them, but I did watch bits of them, meaningful bits, and then looked at the analysis from the guys who are paid to watch all of them.
This is fantastic. So what you're saying here, Mark, is if you run a fashion brand and you have not seen the inside of the wardrobes of at least 20 of your customers, then you can't classify yourself as customer focused.
I would argue not, no. Yeah. Unless you've spoken to real-world customers. And you get these amazing insights because, people talk about loyalty and think about, and in most spaces, including fashion, there is very, very low loyalty. And, you look at these women, for example, virtually every piece was from a different retailer, from a different brand.
Yeah. I think
but that's an insight in itself. That's a really useful, valuable insight.
It totally is. And I think what you're saying there is the depth of insight, right? So if you survey somebody and you ask them, some things like how many different fashion retailers do you reckon you buy clothes off? You get a certain answer, but it's never to the same depth that we're giving you anywhere near the same level of insight as you get if you're doing something like actually seeing a 20-minute recorded video with somebody who talks you through their whole wardrobe. That's really cool. I really like that. So one of the second points you talked about, moving on from kind of understanding your customers and messaging, is around measurement. Now there's a million episodes out there on attribution and measurement. So I don't want to go too deep into this, but I'm interested in your 30-second take on what are you using from a software perspective, and if there's any kind of non-negotiables that you're if you don't have this in your measurement and attribution, you really should.
Look, I think it's a hard problem, and the smartest people I know are the ones who struggle with this question the most. If you think you've got it nailed, you're probably doing something wrong. If you're thinking, I just have no frigging clue what's going on out there, then you're either going really, really, really badly or really quite well. One of the two. But but what most people are doing is they think Google Analytics is reality, or Google Ads reporting or Facebook reporting is reality, and it's just not. And again, to our conversation earlier, is just look at how you purchase and look at your own purchasing patterns, and it very, very rarely allies to click purchase. And so but there's a variety of different tools you can use, and again, we've got these people who've trained that Google Analytics equals reality. Which is, I'm not saying they're not useful. I love Google Analytics. It's a great product. But it's understanding the limitations of a product. Sorry, this is more than 30 seconds. And then, but there's other tools like, there's marketing mix modeling. I'm spending next week, hanging around with the guys at Meta, kind of learning how to use some of their marketing mix modeling tools, which I'm very, very excited about. But there's regression analysis. There's brand awareness trackers. There's all these different tools. And people are expecting there to be a single, simple answer. And if that's what you're looking for, it's just, to the best of my knowledge, it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. That's a good answer. I like the fact that you didn't try and shoehorn something into my constrained 30 seconds. It's a super tough problem. And then so the last one you spoke about is customer experience. So I think you had some really good examples there. And I presume this is tied to the first one, right? Because the more you learn about your customers, the more you're able to actually tailor their customer experience to them. But
yeah,
if I'm a brand and I'm like, oh, I want to evaluate my customer experience and ultimately improve on it, like, what am I doing? Like, what are kind of the first few things that I need to be focused on?
Yeah, look, there's macro, which is more kind of the customer research and the customer insights. And then there's the micro, how are people interacting with your website? And look, they're both equally important. There's the basics, like, doing A/B testing, and A/B testing is one of those things that everyone talks about doing and no one actually does. I mean, not no one ever does, but they do it at a very minimal level. It's just like, it's always kind of, oh yeah, we'll get around to that. Oh yeah, it's just not quite important enough. And, as a company I know who is spending, what are they doing? They're spending about 1.2 million a month on media. So it's a good spend, right? They're spending a lot of money on primarily for Facebook and Google. And yet they're spending $0 on optimizing the website, or they were until a few months ago when I started working with them and engaging on that. And it's a process, but it's so, and again, it's like looking at how users are using your website, understanding your users, and there is the basics, looking at Google Analytics and drop-off points and stuff like that. But it is critical. So sometimes people ask me, what was the secret of Showpo's success? And there's a few answers to that, but one of them was a relentless focus on user experience, and that paid off massive dividends.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's super important to think about user experience, not just until they purchase something, but like the post-purchase experience, and really throughout like the lifetime of their time with you. And so my example of this recently was, I bought a piece of jewelry off a brand, actually a pretty well-known brand, and they did a really good job at targeting me and advertising to me. And their website was actually really nice, and I found a piece and I bought it, and it was, I think about $200, right? So like not cheap at all. It arrived in the worst packaging I've ever seen. This like really horrible like brown paper bag. When I tore it apart, like the sticky bit was still, half stuck on one side, half stuck on the other. And then when I pull it out, it's literally just this little piece of jewelry in like a plastic kind of doggy bag kind of thing. Like no note, no kind of box, no like marketing material, nothing. And immediately I look at this and I was like, if this was on like a street stall, I wouldn't pay like $10 for it. It just didn't, the experience was terrible. And like, I'm never going to wear the thing. I'm going to try and return it. And like, I definitely won't recommend the brand. But from their point of view, they're probably like, hey, great, we made our sale. We got our $200. And what they won't see is like why I never came back or why I never told my friends about it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some marketing person somewhere in this jewelry company who's saying, oh, look, our loyalty's really poor. Let's set up a loyalty program. How do we increase retention? It's like, well, just sort out your bloody customer experience. It's like, yeah, like another thing, one of the things I do is like on a project basis, I just go through and just do an audit of companies' websites and just go through and say, "Oh, this is good, this is not so good," blah blah blah, and give them feedback. And do that over like a month or so. And I usually will make a purchase as part of that process. Except for one company whose AOV is $500, I didn't purchase from them. But in most cases, it's like I'll buy something. And what I find quite often is their transactional emails really poor. And you'll have someone like often full time, working all day on creating these beautiful marketing emails, but not realizing that like half the emails that they get that the customers see are these transactional emails, which you haven't even seen for like 12 months. And like one of them had like broken images in it and, or very outdated images or products they don't even sell anymore featured and stuff like that. And it's this disconnect that, customers are spending more time on your transactional emails than you are. So it's just basic stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. I think, do you follow Rory Sutherland at all and his work?
I don't. The name's familiar, but no.
Yeah, he's a behavioral psychologist / marketer. He's got a couple of good TED Talks and books and stuff that I follow. But he has a great point, which is that we've kind of similar to you, like we've become extremely algorithmic in terms of how we think about like the value of product and how we target people. And his point is that a lot of the value is not in the product itself, right? It's in like the associations that you build around it, the experience and everything else. And I think, some businesses get this really well and some businesses don't. And so it's like, if you think about how you can improve your product, sure, you can go in and, you can make it more premium, or you can find and tweak the actual product, or you can actually just improve the experience around it. So in my case, I don't need a different piece of jewelry. I just need it in a really nice box that comes with a handwritten letter from the CEO that tells me I'm now part of this like exclusive club and that this is a big achievement for me. And suddenly I'm placing a lot more value on that product but the product hasn't changed at all. And I think that's a really interesting way of, it's a bit like magic, right? And this is what he says, you're kind of adding value out of nothing, right? You're not changing the product, but suddenly the perception of the value of the product has gone up.
Yeah, I was just chatting with the CEO of the company yesterday, and he quoted, I think it was Seth Godin to me, and it was this beautiful quote, which I just fell in love with immediately. And I'm going to paraphrase because I can't remember exactly doing off the cast, but it was like, people only care about price if you don't give them anything else to care about. So I'll need to Google that and find the actual quote, but you get the gist of it anyway.
I do. So let's talk about that, right? Because I think the last topic I want to cover off today is about building a brand, right? Because that seems to be a lot of what everybody is talking about now, right? In terms of how you get up. If you're losing the ability to kind of algorithmically target your customers, you need to build a brand that's going to attract them in. And there's all these benefits to that, like we've already talked about a bit.
Yeah.
But build a brand is a very kind of high-level throwaway comment that I hear a lot of people advising businesses to do. How do we break that down? What do you say to businesses, or how do you think about what building a brand actually means for a business?
Yeah, and it's like a fairly large chunk of my work is helping companies who have kind of grown up as 100% performance marketing and help them transition into what I'll call a hybrid, performance brand model. And that's a big chunk of what I do for a living. And but yeah, you're right. That term is thrown around so loosely, and the way I usually people like I remember a marketing manager coming up to me a while ago, and had this proposition. It's like I wanted to sponsor, it was like a festival, and it's like, and so I said, okay, how do we kind of? I think it was 20 grand or something. I don't remember. It was a fair chunk of money, and they said, and how? I said, how do we measure the effectiveness of that? And they said, oh no, it's brand. And what I see is people have like this magic wand, and they wave this magic wand over, anytime they don't want something to be accountable, and call it brand. And to me, it's almost the opposite. I think brand needs to be held to a high degree of account. And it is harder to measure. There's no two ways around that. But just because it's harder doesn't mean you don't do it. So what was the actual question? How do you help people with that? So the first thing is to understand what your brand is, and understand what are your, a brand isn't a logo. A brand is, your personality as a company. It's how you communicate. It's what your core values are. It's a matter of having that simply documented in a very simple way, making sure your entire company understands that. And you can do that, but there's very cheap ways to do it. There's very expensive ways to do that. There are pros and cons, like everything in life. And going through and understand what they are, and making sure every single touch point the customer has, your Facebook ads, your website, your email messages, your transactional email messages, your SEO meta descriptions that appear in Google, making sure your brand message is communicated through every one of those channels. And so you're sending this consistent thing. Because what I do is, you talk to companies and you say, what are your key selling points? And they'll kind of list off 5 or 10 points. And, the next question is, okay, you pick a random company, just say, I don't know, tell me about Dimix or Catch or whatever, any random company. And what do you think of their brand? And, you can barely name 1 or 2 points. And it's just like, people aren't that engaged with you. People don't care about you that much. They can remember 1, 2, maybe 3 things if you're lucky. And so you got to really pick your fight, pick where you want to fight and fight about it. And so that's one part of it, is making sure you actually have a brand that's well defined. And a lot of founders tend to be very visual and not kind of look so much at tone of voice and not look so much at messaging and that sort of stuff. And then on the other side of things, and this is trickier, is looking at the measurements and, your brand spend, if it's well executed, and I do say if it's well executed, will tend to have a better return on investment than your bottom funnel stuff, your Google ads and that sort of stuff. But the payoff is over a longer period of time, which for a really small company is hard. I'm not for a millisecond saying that a company who's making like $2 million a year or something should be dropping $100,000 on a brand campaign. That's suicide. You got rent to pay, you got wages to pay, you got stock to buy. You can't be spending that sort of money. So it's kind of looking at a transition. How do you kind of transition gradually? But if you're a $100 million company and not investing at all in brand, that's probably problematic. And you're probably, digging a grave for yourself at that point.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of quick fire questions following on from that. So if you are if you're a $10 million brand and $10 million annual revenue, do you have any benchmarks for how much you kind of would want to be investing in brand a year? And then what is that for a $100 million brand?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. The textbook, and textbooks speak about averages and speak about different industries. The textbook, which is actually under fire at the moment in the press recently, is Les Binet and Peter Field, and they talk about 60% brand and 40% activations. What's his name? Mr. Ehrenberg, Byron Sharp just came out this week, I think, as we're recording, and saying, no, that's rubbish and it should be higher. And he's talking about 90% brand and 10% activation. I think any marketing manager in the e-com space who's suggesting 90% brand and 10% activation is probably going to get fired very quickly. Having said that, look, I do know, and I can't say who, unfortunately, but I do know of a pure play online company who basically do almost no performance advertising, and those guys are going crazy. And it's a license to print money, this company. Right. And they've just been investing on brands for a long time. And they do outdoor, and outdoor's their biggest marketing spend, and they're only spending like 5% of their revenue as well, and primarily on outdoor and other stuff as well, and that's it. And these guys are going crazy. I mean, they can't keep stock on the shelves, so it can be done. But regardless, I think that there's something magical about that company. Regardless, so what was the question? What sort of percentage?
Because I think there's how you split your marketing spend up between brand and performance brand activation, but then there's also how much are you spending on marketing as a percentage of your revenue, right? Which is always an interesting discussion to have.
Yeah, I mean, most companies I see, usually somewhere in the low teens, kind of that sort of range. It varies on industry and that sort of stuff. But, 10% would be considered low in most industries. 20% would be considered high. Probably even 16, 17% would be considered high. So it's usually low teens. But the distinction between brand and performance is kind of a little bit, the terminology is wrong. All marketing is performance marketing. All marketing is designed to drive revenue. It's just for timeframes. So let's talk about shorter term versus longer term performance advertising. and it is a long-term investment. You know, I see people saying, "Oh, can we get payback in 3 months?" It's like, probably not. But then, you know, if you are a small company, so I know I'm kind of talking circles here, but if you are a small company and you get back to, you know, you've only got $2 million, you know, you're making $2 million. So let's say you're spending, you know, 250,000 in marketing or something like that. Yeah, it's probably not going to work out particularly well to do like a pure kind of long-term thing, because you know, you just don't have those sorts of budgets. But don't forget, every ad is a brand ad. Every way you reach your customers is a brand thing. And so getting that message right and getting that tone right and getting that consistent messaging right is still valuable, no matter whether you're calling it brand or performance or whatever. But the distinction is not as kind of as black and white as people make it out to be.
Mm-hmm. I love that way of thinking of it, right? So it's not a brand versus performance. Like, basically what you're saying is every ad is a performance ad and every ad is a brand ad, and it's just about the duration that you're looking at from a payback perspective. So I think, you know,
beautifully summarized.
The last thing I'm really interested in is what metrics are you looking at to measure the performance of your brand and your brand efforts, and how are you doing that, right? Because we've gotten very accustomed to having these nice tools for all of our kind of digital campaigns and our conversion campaigns, even if we know they're not perfect, but we know they're there. Brand is harder to track, right? Or how do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of touched on some of this earlier. So there's, you know, a lot of people look at volume of brand searches in Google a month. You know, how many people are typing Wayflyer into Google every month, or whatever. And look, it's not a bad measure for a bunch of reasons. I just find that data to be inaccurate. In theory, I like it. I find the data to be inaccurate from Google. You know, for companies who have, you know, moderately large budgets, I do brand trackers. And there's ways you can do, you know, if you talk to Nielsen or whatever, they're going to charge, you know, 20 or 50 or 100 grand or whatever. But there are ways I can do it for a couple of grand, like good quality, really decent brand trackers, if you know how to do it properly.
How? I'm gonna know.
Oh, it's just using right companies, using right tools. That's a whole discussion in itself.
Okay.
But if you just read up on the Ehrenberg Bass mental availability measurement tools, or not tools, techniques, and there's you actually have to read into some academic papers and that sort of stuff. But there's, you know, to answer the right questions, and then you just go out to like panels and ask them basically. It depends on which market you're in. It varies a little bit. I'm not trying to be elusive. It does vary a little bit from market to market. But yeah, I'm doing one for one company. We're getting like a really high quality tracker, and we're paying like $3,000 a pop or something. But it's more about shifting the message from brand awareness to mental availability as well. So that's probably something for you to Google later, because brand awareness in itself isn't a particularly useful measure. Mental availability is. What was the question we're asking?
No, I think you've answered it perfectly. I think you answered it perfectly. We're kind of looking at, like, you know, what type of metrics are you looking at to kind of see how your brand is performing, and you know, what are you actually doing? And so what I'm hearing is, you know, well, we may be a bit of research to do, but, you know, looking at mental availability as opposed to just, you know, brand awareness, which is kind of a pretty loose term. But when you're talking about mental availability, you're talking about kind of like unaided kind of recall and aided recall, these types of things, or is it something different? That's
a brand term. Mental availability is it's kind of a superset of brand. It's like, you know, do they know about you, but do they have positive associations with you? Do they understand your key brand attributes? Because, you know, I could probably list off a dozen brands which you know, but you don't have any positive feeling. You're not going to buy from them. It's like it's awareness in itself is not a particularly useful measure. And the top measure in mental availability is, does that brand come to mind when you enter a buying situation? You know, you're walking down the street, you're thirsty, you think, oh, there's a deli up there, I'm going to pop in there. Do they have a Coke? Do they have a Lips? Do they have a whatever? Do they have that brand you want? And that's mental availability. You know, does the brand enter mind with positive associations at the moment you enter a buying association? Enter the buying category.
Yeah. That's a really, really good definition. And
that's coming back to your customer insights and understanding what makes people enter the category. And most companies can't answer that question. At what point do you enter the buying category?
Yeah. And I guess you can very easily see how that's so tied to actual purchases, right? Because I think you know, for if you're a CMO or if you're leading a marketing team and you're talking to your CEO, CFO, COO, who is not, you know, necessarily that close to marketing, this is like a really good metric to give them, because I think if you show them that metric and you show how you're increasing that, it's very clear to them how that's going to lead to more sales, right? Where the link with kind of more brand awareness metrics, like, you know, just does this person even know my name? Like, have they heard of me? There's obviously a looser tie between that and purchasing. Like, there is one there, but like it's a lot looser than something that's, you know, much further down the funnel, I guess, which is super interesting. Great, Mark. This has been a great conversation. So thank you so much. I've actually learned a lot myself, and I hope the listeners have as well. So is there anything else that, you know, we maybe haven't covered or you want to give a shout out for before we finish up?
No, I'm good.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's good to chat, Stephen.
Great stuff. Well, Mark, this was an awesome conversation. So thank you so much for joining us.
Cool. Thank you.